Dobry wieczór. Panie ministrze, panie dziekanie, witam państwa. This is a discussion about energy security policy. It used to be a technical discussion. It is now and always was a strategic discussion. And we have learned, some of us have learned that lesson the hard way. Russia used energy as a weapon. They tried to do it to destroy the European economies and convince us all to withdraw our support for Ukraine. And let the record show that the Poles predicted this day would come. And I have in mind successive Polish governments, and in particular Piotr Naimski, who devoted 20 years to working on Polish energy security so that one day, when Moscow threatened Poland, Poland was in a position to say, we've got this. The Germans learned a hard lesson, a lesson which is worth learning. Some of us had discussions very early on with the Europeans, but okay. Lessons learned the hard way are lessons well learned. Now we have to think of the future, how to build on the tough lessons and to build our energy security without Russia. And even, as the Germans are now saying, against Russia. Because such are the tasks, such are the requirements of our time. We have a great panel, serious people who know their business. And I hope for a good discussion. It's great to be here during the Atlantic Council's Warsaw Week. The Atlantic Council decided to invest in Poland, and we'd made this decision before February 2022, but I'm glad we did, especially now. And now, Panie Dziekanie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So you have opening persons is two Daniels. So this is interesting. So welcome all of you. Welcome in this place. Welcome all guests, the speakers of this event today. So, how said Aaron on the beginning, this is our first step, our relations. We already signed agreement together with Atlantic Council, and I believe that we will continue our participation. That is our first step because USA is very important for our faculty. Maybe some of you who is first time on our faculty, they step the stairs of the front A place, they saw the board for Zbigniew Brzeziński. And of course, the family Brzeziński is very important for us. Of course, ambassador was not yet on our faculty, but first meeting with Aaron was with Ian Brzeziński, the brother of the ambassador, and this is a step for our relations. I'm a person from far away because I'm from culture, and for me, your subject is strange and not common for me, but I wish you the best discuss because this is a subject very important for world and for our exist. So I believe that you'll have a good discuss, good questions and good answers. Welcome you on our faculty. This building is very specific because it was one of the first buildings on the university. It was founded in 1826, and usually I said for everybody because it's our culture on this building that have a classes in this building, Frédéric Chopin. And I believe that your discuss will be so pleasant and so well like pianist of Frédéric Chopin. I wish you good discuss. I need to apologize because it's now the Senate of the University of Warsaw is 5 hours now. So I need to go there because I believe that will end today, 1 minute. So I need to apologize and wish you best discuss, good question and better answers. Good luck. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's really hard to follow these fantastic remarks, but it's just a true honor here be in your presence. Thank you all for joining us today in person and to our online audience as well. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce our expert panel today. Ms. Yelda Guman, who is the Vice President of Policy, Europe, Middle East, Africa at ExxonMobil Low Carbon Solutions. We have Michal Kurtyka, who is Distinguished Fellow at the Global Energy Center at the Atlantic Council. and a former Minister of Climate of the Republic of Poland. We also have with us Robert Rudik, who is the Energy Attaché at the Embassy of the United States in Republic of Poland, and Derek Wong, who is the Vice President of Government Relations and Public Affairs at Accelerate Energy. I mean, I think we have all of our possible issues covered right here at this table. But first of all, I always like to start off with a quick question for the audience, just to kind of get a feel for different opinions and level of engagement too. Just going to throw it out there. Do we feel that Europe is ready for this upcoming winter? Raise your hands for those who feel like Europe is fully prepared. And for our online audience, feel free to add your comments in the online chat as well. I'd love to hear from you. So in person, I'm not seeing a whole lot of hands. So fascinating. And I know we'll have some opportunities for questions towards the end, so I'm sure they'll be tied into this as well. But let's start off with just kind of an initial question for the actual panel. Just a quick summary of where we're at right now in terms of energy security, progress on climate. Poland in so many ways was so forward-looking in addressing energy security concerns, was at the forefront of thinking through the risks of reliance on Russia and other issues. And the ability to build out all of this infrastructure and be forward-looking is what equipped Poland and the region to contributed significantly to the region surviving the last 15, 16 months of Russia's brutal attack on Ukraine, but also attack on European energy security. But as we look forward, let's assess the current situation and what are some kind of key opportunities that we should be focused on. Rob, I'm going to start with you if you don't
Sure.
mind.
Sure. I think Poland is in a very good place. It's not a risk-free place. In the near term, the resources are there to acquire security of supply. I think the question really becomes a question of cost for the hydrocarbons. What is going to be the impact of businesses? What is going to be the impact of communities if prices don't stabilize? Longer term, I'm very encouraged by the ambition that I see to diversify in that space and to move away from hydrocarbons, move away from those dependencies and volatilities, and look towards technology-based solutions, whether that's wind, whether that's solar. Obviously, civil nuclear has a huge role to play in this, but to build out a stable and long-term energy security future.
Thank you. Michal?
Thank you very much. It's impossible for a minister to be so concise and so precise as you, Robert. So my apologies, because Ambassador, you spoke about Piotr Naimski, and I remember meeting Piotr in 1999. And this is when we started our first attempt to build, as you remember, probably the Baltic pipe. And then it failed. And then we came back in 2005. In 2007, I remember on the night 31st of October to 1st of November, I was negotiating a deal between Gas System and PGNiG, the agreement on the second attempt to Baltic pipe. And then I had to come back for the third time in the government. It was in 2016 that we finalized the Baltic pipe. And it is indeed tempting to say that we were intelligent, but I would rather say that we were stubborn. And
that can be the same thing.
and so, in a way, everything was ready following the Russian aggression with Baltic pipe and LNG terminal in Świnoujście. And that's the one lesson that I remember we discussed in 2005 with Piotr, saying, okay, what kind of transatlantic cooperation could we introduce? And then what you said exactly, Ambassador, we are not at war, military speaking, between Europe and Russia. Ukraine is. But still we are at war in terms of energy supplies. That's war. That's the new way of making war, cutting somebody from supply of energy. And we have NATO, we have Article 5, which can be triggered once you are attacked militarily, but we don't have the equivalent for energy. And Piotr was wise enough to imagine at that time a treaty so that we can build, let's say, emergency mechanism in which we will be able to develop transatlantic answer for country being attacked in terms of energy. And that needs to build redundancies in terms of energy infrastructure. Then we need to have all kinds of equipments guaranteeing security of supply, not during normal economic times. You don't build an army for peacetime. You build an army for wartime. So we need also infrastructure to be ready for the wartime. And here, I believe that we should do even a step further on, finalizing the whole thing with the FSRU terminal in Gdańsk, that we need to finalize and ensure that we are also providing the security of supply to Ukraine. So I would tend to think that that's the first thing that we need to do. The second thing, we need to coordinate accordingly the development of infrastructure across the Atlantic. Because if we have additional importing capacities here in Europe, then we need to have additional exporting capacity on the side of US. And we need both to go hand in hand. And then I think that we need to do a couple of more things, but I will probably skip on this one and continue later on, as we will be discussing on other elements, Olga.
I love the analogy of NATO for energy. I mean, I think that summarizes it really well. You definitely have a way with words. And by the way, Minister just published his book. And it has to do directly with these topics of synchronizing climate and energy security efforts. So I encourage you to check it out for that purpose. Yelda, I'd love to hear from you.
Sure, it's wonderful to be here with some of my old friends. I've been in Washington forever, some of you know, and recently moved to Brussels, so I feel at home always with the Atlantic Council. And I worked on energy security issues in Europe for a very, very long time, and Olga knows this goes way back. I think we are in a good place in Europe, but energy security, I think, in the world that we live in Europe right now is not only availability anymore. I think it's also affordability, and I agree with Robert, but it's also about reducing emissions. And we need to find a way to do all of these at the same time. And we know the regulations, we know which way Europe is headed, so we can do all three. And the way we do that is, I think, just like what Poland is doing, continuing to increase its infrastructure to make sure it has enough supplies of natural gas. But the future is going to be a bit different. I think they also need to decarbonize. So to decarbonize, they will need things like carbon capture storage. They will need low carbon hydrogen. It's very important for Poland, in my opinion, to keep its industries competitive because there's a lot of global competition out there. So these industries, as they decarbonize and reduce their GHG emissions, they also need to stay stable and economic. So I think that's a very important topic. How do we get there? How do we make sure we have enough energy? How do we make sure it's affordable? And how do we make sure it's low carbon?
Thank you, Yelda. Your comments on kind of redefining on what energy security means. I mean, it's become a household discussion. Who would have thought several years ago that families would be discussing geopolitics of energy security, but it is something that everyone is paying attention to because it intersects with every other sector: food security, water security, and geopolitics. Derek, let's hear from you.
Sure. Thank you, Olga. And thank you, Aaron, Ambassador Fried, for organizing this event. For those of you here in Warsaw, you may know that the Atlantic Council, and particularly the Global Energy Center and the Europe Center, are intellectual powerhouses in Washington, providing thought leadership on these types of issues, and their voice is needed here. And so it's great that Aaron's leading the office, and we're celebrating 1 year of the Warsaw office here in Poland. But to get to your question, Olga, I think we're talking about the redefinition of energy security, or reframing it as national security. And countries on both sides of the Atlantic are starting to see that a lot more, particularly in the past year. In the natural gas business, we saw the very obvious ways that Russia was using natural gas specifically as a weapon, not just for Ukraine, but for many of the neighbors here. And one of the questions was, how do you diversify sources? And so there was this very large push last year at a very political level in Washington and Brussels and many other capitals to get more US LNG to our partners and allies. And I think that the task force that was created helped do a lot of those things, helped divert cargoes in certain cases, helped bring on new regasification capacity. For Accelerate, we worked very closely with the government of Finland and our now customer Gasgrid, Finland, to get a new floating terminal in the port of Inkoo in December of last year, in the height of winter, that is now serving Finland, Estonia, and this Baltic Sea region. So that's real national security, and that's energy security. So as we look to the future, and I think Minister Kurtyka spoke a lot about the deliberate planning processes that went into infrastructure investments here in Poland. Yes, Poland was in a relatively good footing last year and into the winter. And now what are those next steps to give it the flexibility that it needs to think about the energy system that's to come? And what are the policy and investment decisions that need to be made today to get to that energy system of the future?
Thank you, Derek. And I promise I did not pay him to say nice things about Atlantic Council. So thank you for this. We promised we didn't. But I think on your success story, there's so much that can be learned there and kind of applied through, thinking through the upcoming winter, like using that kind of level of unity, urgency, kind of that impetus for action, worrying about making excuses for why we can't and just saying, how do we make this work? Because we have to. I think there's, let's go back to that later in terms of how do we apply that for future projects across Europe, because that conversation around building out infrastructure, we are very much far from done. Now, a really great transition to, we're going to dive in on more of the specific technologies and solutions and sources. I want to dive in a bit more on natural gas. So, Robert, a question for you. How can the United States play, I mean, the U.S. has played such a major role already, but continue playing a meaningful role in supporting Poland's on specific, tangible, constructive steps to reduce reliance on, gas, oil, and, we've seen tons of progress made there, but how do you make that permanent? How do we make sure that in a couple of years there aren't voices or pressures to say, let's go back to buying Russian sources?
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And you're absolutely right. We cannot go back to business as usual. We cannot go back to recreating the same dependencies that have created the challenges that Europe is facing today. President Biden has been to Warsaw twice since this war escalated in Ukraine, and during his last visit, he talked about energy security, and he talked about Putin's attempt to weaponize energy and his attempt to use it to break the will of Europe, just like Ambassador Fried talked about. And then the president said something very accurate. Vladimir Putin failed. And he failed, and what he got instead is a monumental shift, a motivated shift from our European allies and our partners to accelerate their energy transition and to make that step away from Russian energy sources permanent. And the president is absolutely right, but we need to do it strategically. We need to make sure that the infrastructure plans that we're putting together are coordinated. So there's a huge push for renewables, but in many cases, not enough attention, for instance, is paid to the grid to make sure that the backbone and related infrastructure is able to handle all that generating capacity. So I think that's very important. And we also need to make sure that we're not trading, petro dependencies for electro dependencies, and that all the components and all the rare earths that go into this transition are being sourced along sustainable supply chains from reliable, trusted partners. The other aspect that we need to consider, especially as democracies, but as any responsible government needs to consider, is a transition that serves our citizens. We need to make sure that it is a just transition. So for example, a lot of these great technologies are going to create a tremendous amount of high-paying, good quality jobs. But as leaders, we need to make sure that we're preparing our citizens to fill those jobs so that they can take advantage of the great economic opportunity that this transition provides. We also need to make sure that we're listening and understanding so that the cost of this transition is not, whether that's the financial cost or the environmental cost, is not being unfairly burdened on disadvantaged communities, which has happened historically in a lot of other energy transitions. So we really need to make sure that it's a strategic plan that is financially and socially sustainable.
Thank you so much, Robert. I definitely want to go back to workforce development if we have some time towards the end, because I think that's something that doesn't get attention. And I think there's a really important transatlantic angle to that cooperation that gets overseen, because you're kind of going, well, Europe needs to develop its own workforce and skills, and we do our own thing. But there's a lot of synergies and opportunities on working and building out the next kind of skill set and preparing people for better jobs, more meaningful jobs, interesting jobs of the future with better quality conditions as well. I am going to hop around just a little bit and go back to Derek, and then we'll loop back around here. I wanted to follow up on what you said on kind of some of the flexible solutions, and kind of the policies that are needed, kind of learning from your previous successful experiences, even just kind of looking at broader issues, just like the overall shortage of FSRUs out there in terms of the opportunities to provide these flexible solutions for other countries that are looking for it. I know that's like 3 questions in one, but I just want to get some more specific examples of what does that actually look like for Poland and countries in the region.
Sure, and FSRUs is a term that we've been using in the industry, but floating storage and regasification units. These are floating LNG import terminals that can be relatively quickly deployed, and we've seen this in several European countries in the last year. I gave the example of Finland, but essentially these are tools and assets that energy policy planners can use to think about what is current and future demand looking like, and how do we use the flexibility of this asset to diversify supply sources, and to think about how to integrate that into power and electricity planning. So in the case of Accelerate, we have a flexible fleet, we like to call it, of 10 FSRUs, purpose-built by reliable shipyards that we've worked with for many years in South Korea. And you're right in terms of the supply chain of FSRUs right now. There is now probably what we'd call a shortage as a result of the new deployments in the last year. So looking at different ways of getting flexible LNG, of getting other energy sources that are built into the planning process for policymakers, for gas TSOs, and also thinking about how governments can de-risk some of these investments. And we've seen very publicly the head of DFC come out to Poland to be in the region and to be present, to think about what are the energy investments that the USG can come in and help de-risk through public-private partnerships. In the case of Accelerate, we've worked very successfully with the IFC in other markets, and they've helped, again, to de-risk some of our investments, to bring in other lenders and other equity partners. For us, a very successful implementation of that was in Bangladesh, where we helped open that country's market to LNG in partnership with the IFC. So these are some of the models that I think can be replicated, and I think that the U.S. government, as well as other friends and allies, have a really key role to play.
Thank you so much, Derek. And just to add one more thing on the de-risking, because I think it's such an important topic that also doesn't get enough attention. Sometimes these projects don't move forward because sometimes the entities, organizations that the U.S. companies or other companies are trying to partner with, they may not have a credit rating, or there could be some other barriers. There's a will, but there could be some other barriers that could be, I don't want to say easily, but could be addressed at a national or at the EU level if there's the will, if there's a coalition to do that. So thank you so much. Just really important points. Yelda, I want to go to you, because as we talk about infrastructure diversification, supply diversification, and what that actually looks like on the ground, a huge part of that conversation is how to also minimize the carbon intensity of these supplies as well. And a lot of companies are on the leading edge of integrating new solutions. There's been a lot of announcements, even financing, and just out there. Help us kind of understand how to bridge the gaps between these big goals, announcements, MOUs signed, and the actual kind of getting these like CCUS, hydrogen integration actually implemented into these massive projects.
Great question, Olga. And it's hard. That's why you don't see FIDs every day. In fact, you see, if you just go back over the last 2 years and count the number of MOUs that were signed, and then count the number of FIDs that were signed in the energy transition business, you would see they're probably mostly in the renewable energy business, but not in CCU, yes, not in hydrogen. And the reason it's basically not happening is really the market signals that we are not seeing. In order to do carbon capture storage, you need access. You need access to pore space. You need access to storage space. And if governments do not make that available to the private sector, then we have no storage. We cannot put money to develop that storage. If the carbon price is not sufficient, then the governments will need to incentivize that. So let's say ETS price today is something like 88 euros per ton. It costs much more than that to do a project, the CCS project, even if you're very close to storage and you have a lot of concentrated emissions. So these are the things that we talk to policymakers about in Europe. And then an interesting angle, actually, back to your natural gas story is hydrogen. So there's a lot of talk about hydrogen, and in terms of, what color of hydrogen do you like? And we are colorblind when it comes to hydrogen, because today there is no hydrogen market in Europe. There's no market. So if you're trying to create a market, it's better to be colorblind and create that market. And if you want to decarbonize it completely afterwards, then you still have the option to do so. And that's where the link is between hydrogen and natural gas. So if you want to do blue hydrogen, for example, you can totally take that LNG and natural gas and turn it into blue hydrogen. And that is available as a technology, and you can scale that up today, and then it's a sort of an added benefit of the natural gas industry. You create a hydrogen business.
I love the comments around color. I don't think we can afford to kind of pick, favorite specific technologies. We have to be technology agnostic in order to create that value chain. So thank you so much for bringing these points up, Hilda. Michal, let's zoom out just a little bit and kind of have more of a regional approach to the infrastructure, supply diversification that's happening in Poland. Is such an important country, important player in that conversation. But so could be Ukraine. I mean, there's things that we can think about right now as Ukraine is defending its land and has all sorts of other issues, caused by Russia across the energy sector. But Ukraine has tremendous natural gas resources, kind of thinking through the long-term opportunities. But in the short term, just the reality is Ukraine may need some imports from Europe. They imported some last winter, about 1 BCM. It's likely that they might need more imports in the upcoming winter as well. So talk to us about kind of how you see that relationship of infrastructure being built out and the role that Ukraine can play now, but also long-term, a couple of years from now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Olga. Maybe I will start by saying that we have a discrepancy between short and long term in Europe right now. A big problem coordinating our short and long term energy needs. Because this is what Robert said, that in Poland we have a long term plan for energy that's called Energy Policy till 2040. It's a document which has been adopted by the Council of Ministers, which is being upgraded after the war, and rightly so. But it is one of the few coherent plans in Central Europe, providing a perspective for the industry. And what Yelda rightly pointed out is that we need something predictable on the side of government, and we have a steady supply of policies. So that is the first thing. So we need to be credible as governments in order to set the path, to set the target, yes? Where are we going? And here we have the first bottleneck, because we are not providing enough policy responses, and administrative capacities are somehow too constrained among Europeans. But this is one part of the story. The second part of the story is that we have been caught in the middle of the river, if I may say, between old and new energy paradigm. And so we have also to be able to make sure that gas supplies are going, for example, to Ukraine or to Poland, yes? And this requires lots of investments. And it was already said, the problem with these investments is that nobody is right now willing to pay for them in terms of institutions. In Europe, the biggest public donor of money, European Investment Bank, is forbidden for providing funds to gas infrastructure. And is also forbidden to provide guarantees for gas supply. So in a way, we are not coherent. We are saying, yes, Ukraine needs a lot more money, but nobody is able to provide guarantees for Ukrainian companies in order to come back to Poland and say, hello, guys, we will need more capacity on your side, and we will need additional capacities in order to bring gas to us. The same applies to Moldova. Poland supported a lot Moldova. I'm in direct contact with colleagues, Polish colleagues working in Moldova. First big diversification contracts away of Russia. But again, it's not credible for LNG suppliers from Europe, from US, sorry, because nobody is able to so we have a discrepancy, and in US you have the same challenge, if I may say. I don't know how to solve it, because again, we have long and short term, which are exactly the opposite in terms of financial needs, yes? So how to navigate through this in an intelligent manner. And also, but basically speaking, I think that we should include, as Europeans, energy community countries. Energy communities is a European institution which is supporting Western Balkans, Ukraine and Georgia, basically speaking, to help them reach European energy market. And energy community countries should be supported in the best possible manner and should be integrated into the energy planning within of European countries. Why? Because then we can optimize with Ukraine, for example. Ukraine has big storage of gas. It can be maybe later on used for hydrogen. It has big deposits of shale gas. And then Ukraine has been the biggest producer of ammonia. The biggest port of ammonia in Europe is Odessa. And so on and so on. I mean, we have to integrate Ukraine into strategic thinking in Europe, and we have to be also able to flexibly play between long and short-term constraints in terms of providing adequate tools to do it.
Thank you, Yilda. Please.
Yeah, I cannot agree more on short and long term. And I just want to bring perhaps a global perspective why that is so. And you may want to comment from a market perspective. But LNG cargoes go where they get the best price. And we know they get a good price from Asia. So yes, we do have a lot of LNG in the US, but Europe also needs to be competitive in the international LNG market to be able to attract those cargoes. And there's not only competition for capital to invest, but it's also those precious cargoes. So what inevitably happens is a lot of people buy in the short-term market, which the spot market is, by definition, is more expensive. But if you look at it and from the seller's perspective, you might as well sell, you prefer to sell to someone who's committed long term to buy your cargoes for as long as possible for the best price you can get. So it's very important to balance that short-term, long-term perspective in Europe to be able to compete and get those cargoes that are dearly needed here.
Derek, I had a feeling you wanted to intervene really quickly.
Well, hard to follow up on both of those comments, but I'll just add from the point of view of LNG exporters or an industry, yes, absolutely, they're looking to be able to sell long term, to be able to reach FID, get the financing that they need to invest into the liquefaction facilities. And on the flip side, when we talk to some of our customers here in Europe and in the developing world, they're also looking for some of that certainty around price and not be beholden to the volatility that we've seen in the last year or so. And so one of the ways of insulating against that is to be able to sign long-term contracts. So.
Thank you so much, Derek. I mean, we can talk about these gaps and the discrepancies, I think, for hours and hours because they're so important and they're so tangible in terms of kind of being the barriers to seeing these projects move forward. But I also want to make sure that we cover some of the other technologies, just how Poland was very much at the forefront of the energy security conversation. The country and the region actually could truly lead on the energy transition and on climate as well with the right movements, policies, and investments. And one of those areas is, of course, nuclear. So, Robert, I want to go to you next on how does, what role can U.S. play in working with Poland on cooperating to accelerate this nuclear renaissance that we're seeing on both sides of the Atlantic, making sure that we capture this momentum and also at the same time reduce reliance on Russian nuclear supply chains?
Olga, that's a great question because this really is, a once-in-a-generation opportunity to reimagine the role of civil nuclear energy, and I think our partners and allies in the region here have realized that, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, and are really seizing that opportunity as so many of these countries have to reshape their entire energy infrastructure. Here in Poland, most of the coal power plants in the midterm, long term will close because they're old and they won't be able to continue to operate anymore. They're past their usable life. So to take this opportunity and to take a step back and say, knowing what we know now, understanding the risks and the threats from malign actors, how do we want to build a secure energy future that meets our net zero goals? And nuclear energy has to be a big piece of that. That's where I spend the bulk of my time here. So it is one of those things I could talk about for hours and hours, and I won't do that to you today. But we're really committed at the Department of Energy, at the U.S. Embassy, to helping make Poland a regional hub for the deployment of nuclear energy technology. And we're starting from a little lower base, to be frank. Poland has never had a nuclear power industry. So some other countries have some advantages. But where Poland really excels is the size of the market, the amount of technical knowledge that's already here, the resources that are being put into this, and the serious motivation in a nonpartisan sense that we are seeing. Recent polling tells us 86% of Poland supports nuclear energy. That makes this probably the most nuclear friendly market in the world. And so we have to take advantage of that. The foundation of our cooperation here is the AP1000 project we're doing with Westinghouse and Bechtel. But like any house, the foundation is not where you stop. That's a great technology. It's really well understood. It's operating today. We know we can build it on a predictable timeline and a predictable cost, and we're going to do that. And then we're going to build on that with more advanced technology. And one of the big things the Department of Energy is committed to doing is we're putting a regional European clean energy training center here in Warsaw to help bring expertise from across the DOE enterprise, from U.S. universities, to Poland to make it kind of a central place to learn these skills. And we're talking about everything ranging from technical skills, from vocational skills like welding, all the way through designing PhD programs, because it really takes this whole workforce. So we're really, really excited about that.
Thank you so much, Robert, and it really nicely ties in with your workforce comments earlier on. Michal, I want to go to you, just a couple of points here. First of all, learning from Poland's example of being able to educate citizens and engage citizens on the potential that nuclear has, that wasn't always the case where nuclear energy was popular here, particularly in the last several decades, but that has shifted as people learn more about the potential and the importance of it for energy security and also decarbonization. So I think it's a fascinating case study because, let's be honest, enthusiasm around nuclear is not exactly shared equally across all of the European countries, right? So what can we learn there? And I think just maybe kind of talk about some of the other things that we should be paying attention to, such as synchronization on standards and certifications that may or may not be helpful.
Thank you very much. Yes, nuclear is an important part of my thinking about Poland's energy future. I'm not in the office right now, so I can be a little bit more frank. We didn't do as good job in terms of nuclear advancement as we did in terms of gas diversification. I think there is scope for improvement. And accelerating nuclear is one of the biggest challenge that we have. And making sure that we will be able to install nuclear of different technologies. You mentioned AP1000, which is the most advanced and I think also the most appropriate to Poland needs, because that's an industrial country and we need a lot of supply of competitive, stable energy across years. But we need also to have this administrative capacity for licensing, for permitting, etc. And this is an administration which has not this experience. So we need to make sure that the administration is also able to follow up. And you said that, and I'm very glad to hear this, being a former leader on the project, and during because of creation of Ministry of Climate, we also adopted a new nuclear policy, bringing Westinghouse in the game, if I may say. So I'm glad that we have such a alignment of interest across all political parties. But then we have to make sure that if you said that we are able to build it on time and on cost, then we have to find creative ways of combining regulatory, technical, and financial skills across the Atlantic between Polish and American government in order to make this project a success story. Because when you talk about nuclear, per se, everybody is happy, but when you start to talk about given nuclear, first of all, people are not happy because it's close to their door, and then they are saying, oh, what time it will take to build this, whether there will be not overrun in terms of time and cost. So we need to be a little bit more also creative in order to secure this project across countries. And I firmly believe that nuclear will be playing a very important role, and this indeed, as you said, Rob, also is to be the new Polish coal.
Thank you so much, Michal. I know that we have lots of expertise in the audience as well, and lots of opinions and thoughts and feedback on this. But if you have any question, just a reminder that please raise your hands. We'll have some mic. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Look at that.
Marek Żółkowski, good afternoon. Thanks so much, all distinguished panel, for these excellent remarks. I want to ask on the factor of the lack of the presence of green energy as a factor of the higher competitiveness of Central Europe economies or US economies in the future, or even in now or now. What is the case of Poland and Central Europe? Really, it's true. We capitalize both our energy security and politics here in transatlantic area on really proper energy security idea. Daniel mentioned Piotr Naimski. It was really successful, not so easy, provided for the other fora, including NATO. It was really difficult policy, but it was successful. But now we are leading also in transferring many goods, including oil, to Ukraine. But it turned out that it's only temporary. In the terms, like Yelda said, that decarbonization is a challenge, but it's a really, according to this strategy mentioned by Minister Kurtyka, we, as Poland, could be a last country which will decarbonize its economy here in Europe, according to the parameter of time. Coal using to 2049, not to 2023 or 2033, 2049. It's the case. But it's really at literature or politicians, starting from US, European Union, but it's also Arab countries, Latin America, are starting to use this term green energy, what you could name as a decarbonized energy, something like that, as a way to increase the competitiveness of their economies and also the power of states. It's a really case for Central Europe and Poland thinking in this way, that our competitiveness, including political one, will depend on the decarbonization, really, decentralization, decarbonization, not only pushing energy security policy in more or less traditional, I could say, successful but traditional way, which is sometimes a mistake to continue, only a continuation of policy. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Several of your names were mentioned, but who wants to grab this one? Yelda, your name was mentioned, Mihaly, yours, but anyone else who wants to address it as well?
Well, I can just start, but in terms of global competition, I totally agree with you. And there's a theme in Europe about perhaps eroding industrial competitiveness. And that, I think, actually is very connected to what you talked about in terms of just transition. Now, Minister Kurtyka knows this, but I lived in Poland in 1989 when I was a student. And I was in Katowice for 2 months. And it was a lovely period. This is before the Berlin Wall came down. A fascinating time to be there. But because of Katowice, of course, all of my friends and their parents were all employed either by coal mines or by the heavy industry in the region, which was really an important, or perhaps the only source of economic welfare there. And I think too, we need to, if you're going through an energy transition, you also need to think about these people. So you need to transition the people, not only the energy, so that they can get new skills and new jobs into whatever that region is going to. But in terms of, and to be able to do that, Poland needs to stay competitive. To keep those jobs or start producing something else that they can do competitively. So I agree with you, it's extremely important, but I also think it's not an on and off button. It's by definition, it's a transition. So you will have certain industries or certain plants and manufacturing facilities start the transition, and they're not going to get there tomorrow, and they all have choices to make. So I think we're going to see this transition also in Poland, and it's already happening. And but I agree with you, global competitiveness needs to be top of mind for everyone.
Thank you, Yelda. Did anyone else want to respond? Just, I would encourage you to just keep it really short so we can get to other questions.
Very brief. Especially on the issue of nuclear technology, as Poland is poised to be a first mover here, not just with the AP1000, but with a variety of SMRs that are looking at Poland for large-scale deployment, the skill set that Polish companies develop and Polish workers develop in how to build and deploy and manage this technology, as the rest of the world gets on this bandwagon, so to speak, the opportunity for that to be an export for Polish companies is tremendous.
Thank you. I think we had another question over here. If you could just say your name and keep it concise, I would appreciate it.
Of course. I'm Kamila Pruniska. I'm professor here at the faculty at the Department for Strategic Studies and International Security. It's been a very interesting discussion, so thank you for your remarks. I have one remark and two questions. The first remark regards the understanding of energy security. Just on behalf of myself and energy security scholars, I would just like to emphasize that for us, energy security has never been just about technical issues or just about availability. It's always been about availability of energy supplies, affordability, and sustainability. So these three dimensions we have been taken seriously into, of course, considerations in our research. The second question regards weaponization of energy, which we've been observing since the beginning of the war, and obviously you focused on weaponization of gas supplies. However, using energy as a weapon has been taking many forms, and we've been observing in many areas. So, regarding this nuclear enthusiasm in Europe, maybe not in Europe, but in Poland, what about weaponization that we've been observing since the very first days of Russia's aggression? Weaponization of nuclear power plants. And blackmailing permanently the European Union, Poland, Ukraine, the European Union, with nuclear incident and radioactive pollution. This should be definitely also taken seriously into considerations and a discussion of weaponization of energy. So the question basically is what lessons we should learn from weaponization of nuclear power facilities in the course of the war. And finally, the third question I would address to Robert, because I've been inspired by when you said that we need to be cautious and when we are and not to turn, as I understood you, not to turn gas import dependency into another form of dependency, that is electricity dependency. I would like you to tell more us about it. And I must say that I've been involved for the last 2 years, together with the scholars from many other European universities, in the projects called Geopolitics of Energy Transition. And we've been precisely researching these kind of issues. So if you could tell more, what challenges do you see? I would be, thank you.
So I only have just a minute left. So Michal, if you could take 20 seconds. I know that's an impossible task.
But
then
Rob, yes.
and Robert, then we can go to you quickly. I would appreciate that, so we can try to stay on time.
Very briefly, Russia uses nuclear weaponization because it's substitute to use of nuclear arms, and so it's sending a signal to us that it's flirting with the use of nuclear bombs. Yeah? Why they are not saying anything about oil and gas still flowing in the pipes through Ukraine, and you don't see anything? Because it's not the message that the Kremlin wants to send us. That's the first message, and the second is we obviously it is radioactivity, etc., etc. But I think also it's easy to play on. Let's say, European fears against nuclear on this ground. And you can see how big blow to nuclear has been done with even Fukushima disaster. Fukushima, where you had not a single victim out of radioactivity, And still, when you ask in Germany, Fukushima, they will all say Atomkatastrophe, associating Fukushima with 15 or 20,000 people dead from nuclear radioactivity. Nobody was dead out of activity, and WHO report said that nobody even now has been affected in negative way through radioactivity. And that's completely not the way in which it has been portrayed in Europe. So we have to be a little bit also thinking about how Russians and Kremlin were playing with our fears, legitimate fears, on nuclear radioactivity to turn us away from nuclear in this part of the world. The same as they did, and I find, with shale gas, by the way.
Robert, please, 30 seconds.
Yes, I'll be as quick as I can. Yeah, but I completely agree with the minister. Russia's conduct in Ukraine has been brutal and unconscionable in so many ways, and this is just another one. They are absolutely playing on the fears, the historic fears of the European community as a scare tactic. One of the most important things that all responsible nations need to do is condemn in the strongest possible terms the exploitation, the hostage taking of a nuclear power plant for military and strategic advantage. And, there has to be responsible management through the International Atomic Energy Agency, and this has to be non-negotiable and vocally clear from every responsible country, and repeatedly until these issues are resolved. On your second question on dependencies, I think we just have to take really hard looks at our supply chain. And this isn't just for energy, it's in 5G, it's in other issues. We need to understand all the components and raw materials that we depend on to maintain our lives. Just like with energy security, we need to know when we flip the light switch, everything that goes on behind the scenes and all the just-in-time supply, we need to understand where that comes from. And what we've learned is that we need to make sure that comes from a trusted partner and that we have alternatives if it doesn't.
Thank you so much, Robert. Okay, we're going to do a quick lightning round. So 10-second max answer from each of you, one sentence max on kind of the cooperation of Poland, US, across Europe as well on Ukraine's energy sector reconstruction, thinking through kind of some of the most important principles, one or two max since we are lightning round. Derek, I'm going to put you on the spot. What do you think should be an important principle as we cooperate on reconstruction of Ukraine's energy sector?
Yeah, I would say having multi-stakeholder input. So it's not just about governments, it's about private companies and civil society, including academic institutions, to be able to harness all of the brain power for solutions.
Amazing. Under 10 seconds, Yelda.
Okay, I think technology is very important because both sides of the Atlantic, there's U.S. technology, obviously, not only nuclear, but also natural gas. And I think Poland has choices, and these choices can be efficient if they have technical cooperation, or perhaps more technical cooperation with the U.S.
Thank you. Michal.
Yeah. Before rebuilding, we have to make sure that we are able to go through the next winter, and it will be quite complicated, and we have to maintain social and political cohesion among European countries. And a single incident in terms of energy supply or energy volatility will be triggering undesired effects, and we have to be prepared again for that. But once we are getting to the rebuilding of Ukraine, we have to think that rebuild is not, shouldn't be the way it was designed previously, that there is an opportunity to create a completely tabula rasa new system, and that's a responsibility not only of Ukrainians, but of community of values, which is transatlantic community, which we represent.
Robert?
The minister is absolutely right. When Ukraine builds back, they have to build back better. I have no doubt that Ukraine will win this war. And the next challenge, once they do, is to win the peace. And we need all our allies and partners that are doing such a tremendous job of supporting Ukraine now to continue to do so and to continue to be unified and coordinated so that when they do win the war and they do win the peace, that they can be successful in their reconstruction.
Thank you so much for your concise answers. And thank you to this fantastic panel. I feel like we could keep this conversation going for hours. And the great news is that there is a reception after this that I hope all of you will join so we can continue this discussion. But most importantly, there's a broader, bigger kind of final reception of the Warsaw Week tomorrow at 6 p.m. at Reduta Bank. And I hope that all of you will be able to join us for that, because that will be a way to celebrate Aaron's achievement in kind of the year of having this office and just leading discussions on all of these important topics and cooperations with U.S. It takes a lot of effort to put something like this together. I just want to mention my colleagues Lisa and James, and of course Aaron, congratulations to you again, and Denise, and those of our colleagues who are on the AV team who we can't see right here in the room, but are working really hard to make sure that this is streamed properly and that you can reshare this event on social media afterwards. And once again, thank you to this fantastic panel and to the Warsaw University for this fantastic venue. Thank you. All right. Please join us.